For most people, the rivalry between Rome and Carthage feels like a simple military story. The armies, the generals, the sweeping battles across continents. It all appears as if Rome's dominance was the natural order of the ancient world. But history rarely follows a straight line. Empires don't rise because they deserve to. They rise because someone else built a system strong enough to challenge them. Long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, it faced a rival unlike any it had ever known. A city that forged power, not through conquest, but through trade. A state that trusted capital more than legions. Commercial empire that dared to challenge Rome's destiny and for a moment, almost succeeded. Carthage's rise did not begin with armies, monuments, or heroic myth. It began with margins, markets, and the logic of the sea. The Phoenician settlers who founded the city were merchants before they were anything else, and they built their society on a principle that would shape centuries of Mediterranean history. Control the roots, it's not the land. This single insight turned a small North African outpost into a financial powerhouse whose influence depended less on territory and more on circulation of goods, of silver, of opportunity. Carthage understood something that even many modern states still struggle to grasp. A harbor can be more valuable than a hinterland. Shipping lane can generate more wealth than a battlefield. An alliance based on profit can be more flexible than one based on loyalty. This worldview allowed Carthage to dominate the Western Mediterranean long before Rome even understood the rules of maritime power. The double harbor of Carthage was not simply infrastructure, it was a blueprint for an economic empire. The outer harbor absorbed the constant flow of merchant ships arriving from Sardinia, Sicily, Egypt, and Iberia. The inner harbor, circular, sleek, and heavily fortified, served as the nerve center of the Carthaginian navy. The design allowed rapid deployment, swift repairs, and tight logistical control. In a world driven by winds, wood, and manpower, Carthage engineered an operating system that maximized speed and minimized downtime. That was not an accident. That was a financial strategy. Rome, by contrast, developed on land. Its economy grew from fields and farms, not docks and docksides. Its citizens became soldiers because war was integrated into their civic identity, not outsourced to specialists. Rome's world was slower, heavier, and deeply tied to the cycles of agriculture. Carthage's world was fluid, dynamic, and global in everything but name. For decades, these two economic philosophies existed in parallel without colliding. Carthage commanded the sea lanes. Rome reorganized the Italian peninsula. But the Mediterranean is not a region that rewards coexistence. It forces choices. It compresses ambitions. And eventually the ambitions of Carthage and Rome converged on the same prize: Sicily. Sicily's importance cannot be overstated. It was not just a midpoint between continents. It was the switchboard of Mediterranean commerce. Whoever controlled Sicily controlled the flow of grain, tribute, and maritime taxes. Carthage viewed it as a revenue engine. Rome viewed it as a security risk. Both views were rational. Both were incompatible. And from that incompatibility emerged the First Punic War. At the outbreak of the war, Carthage held every advantage. It had fleets, shipyards, routes, and a long history of maritime warfare. Rome had none of these. What Rome lacked in experience, it compensated with institutional audacity. Copied a Carthaginian warship, reproduced it hundreds of times, and financed its new navy through a combination of loans, levies, and patriotic contributions. Rome, without meaning to, invented a hybrid model, a militarized financial system that fused state power with private risk. Carthage relied on strength. Rome manufactured strength. This contrast became the foundation of the conflict. Carthage commanded capital. Rome mobilized citizens. Carthage purchased expertise. Rome generated it through necessity. One system prioritized efficiency. The other prioritized endurance. While Carthage believed it could outspend Rome, it misunderstood what Rome was truly building, not just a fleet but a financial identity. When the war dragged on, Carthage's structural vulnerability surfaced. Its military relied heavily on mercenaries, Iberians, Numidians, Balearic slingers, Greek specialists. These soldiers were skilled, deadly, and expensive. Long as the Carthaginian treasury remained full, They were reliable. But war is not kind to balance sheets. When payments stalled, loyalty evaporated. When Carthage lost Sicily, it lost revenue. And when it lost revenue, it triggered the most violent internal crisis the city had ever faced, the mercenary war. It was a brutal lesson in the limits of liquidity. Carthage had built wealth, but it had not built cohesion. Rome had suffered defeats, but every defeat strengthened its unity. For Carthage, economic strain turned inward. For Rome, economic strain turned outward. That was the first sign that the Mediterranean was shifting. And even though Carthage survived the mercenary war, it emerged weakened, chastened, and searching for a new financial base to recover what it had lost.
Ow.
The recovery of Carthage after the mercenary war was not inevitable, it was engineered. And the engineer was Hamilcar Barca, the father of a figure who would later reshape Rome's destiny. Hamilcar recognized that Carthage's future could not depend solely on old trade routes that Rome now contested. Carthage needed a new source of revenue, one so vast that it could restore the city's economy, rebuild its fleets, and fund a more powerful military machine. He found it in Iberia. Spain was not just a territory. It was an industrial zone before the word existed. Its silver mines represented the kind of resource that could sustain an entire empire. Hamilcar carved out a semi-autonomous Carthaginian domain, run less like a province and more like a corporate subsidiary. The Barcid family became something unprecedented in ancient history, a private dynasty managing a mining empire on behalf of a state that was too politically divided to do it themselves. The silver that flowed from Iberia recharged Carthage's financial system. It funded armies, fleets, and political influence. It created a new class of military professionals loyal to the Barcids rather than the Carthaginian Senate. And it produced the conditions in which Hannibal, Hamilcar's son, was trained militarily, politically, and financially. Hannibal's genius lay not only in tactics, but in understanding the system he represented. Carthage's strength was capital, mobility, and the ability to assemble multinational forces quickly. Hannibal embraced that model fully. His army was not a national force, it was a portfolio. Iberian heavy infantry, Numidian cavalry, African spearmen, Celtic warriors, each unit selected for a specific function. Each financed by Iberian silver. Each forming part of a strategy that targeted Rome's economic structure as much as its legions. When Hannibal marched across the Alps, he was not simply executing a military maneuver. He was executing a financial strike. His goal was not to obliterate Rome in a single blow, but to collapse the alliances that formed Rome's tax base. If Italy's cities defected, Rome's revenues would crumble. If revenues crumbled, Rome's credit would break. If Rome's credit broke, the war would end itself. At first, the strategy worked. Hannibal won at the Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and, most famously, Cannae. These battles did more than destroy armies. They destabilized the economic confidence of the Republic. Grain convoys stalled. Aristocrats wondered whether their investments in the state were still recoverable. For the first time, Rome was confronting the kind of financial warfare it had never imagined. And yet Rome's response revealed a structural resilience that Carthage lacked. The Roman aristocracy did something extraordinary. They used their personal fortunes to fund the Republic's survival. They loaned money to the state. They financed new legions. They covered the shortages caused by crushing defeats. Their identity as citizens overpowered their fear as creditors. Their loyalty was not purchased, was inherent. Carthage's merchants, by contrast, viewed the war through the lens of risk management. They were cautious with reinforcements. They were slow to supply Hannibal. They treated his campaign like an investment, with diminishing returns. They thought in quarters. Rome thought in generations. Hannibal's brilliance could not compensate for a fractured political economy. The Carthaginian Senate hesitated at the wrong moments, doubted at the wrong moments, and clung to trade revenue at the wrong moments. Hannibal stood in Italy as one of history's greatest generals, but he stood there without the sustained backing of the state he served. Rome adapted again, shifted the war to Spain, targeting the very minds that financed Hannibal's campaign. Scipio Africanus understood that Carthage's power could be dismantled not on Italian soil, but at the source of its silver. When Scipio captured New Carthage, he seized not just territory, but the financial infrastructure that powered Carthage's engine. It was the turning point. Hannibal fought on, but Carthage's liquidity was now unreliable. Its alliances began to fracture, and Rome, fueled by a growing capacity to borrow, taxes, and mobilize, prepared to strike at North Africa. The final clash at Zama was less a battle of generals and more a battle of systems. Rome arrived with an economy strained but intact. Carthage arrived with an economy intact but strained beyond sustainability. And in a contest of attrition, endurance prevails over efficiency. Carthage lost. Not because it was weak, but because its model was not built for total war. Rome's was. Rome's victory in the Second Punic War was not the end of Carthage, at least, not immediately. What followed was decades of economic suppression disguised as diplomacy. Rome imposed indemnities that siphoned Carthage's revenue, restricted its ability to wage war, and forced it into a subordinate economic role. Carthage complied, and astonishingly, Carthage recovered. It rebuilt through agriculture, manufacturing, and renewed trade. It became prosperous again, too prosperous for Roman comfort. Rome's fear was not military resurgence. It was economic relevance. The Carthaginian state that Rome had tried to suffocate was reinventing itself as a commercial dynamo, and Roman senators understood the implications. A wealthy Carthage was a competitive Carthage. Competitive Carthage was a threat, and a threat in Roman political culture was intolerable. Carthage was ultimately destroyed not because of Hannibal's legacy, but because its economic engine refused to stop running. The Romans burned the city, enslaved its population, and attempted to erase it from the Mediterranean map. But they did not erase its influence. Rome absorbed Carthage's lessons in trade, naval power, logistics, and financial adaptation. The conqueror became the inheritor. And this is where the ancient world begins to mirror the modern one. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage was not a clash of civilizations, it was a clash of economic architectures. Carthage represented a commercial empire. Rome represented a territorial empire. Carthage projected power through markets, sea routes, and capital. Rome projected power through citizens, legions, and credit. One system thrived in prosperity, the other thrived in crisis. If you replace the triremes with oil tankers, the silver mines with rare earth minerals, and the mercenaries with private contractors, the parallels become unmistakable. Some modern powers rely on trade networks, shipping lanes, infrastructure loans, debt diplomacy, and global supply chains to shape the world. Others rely on alliances, bases, conscription systems, national mobilization, and the ability to absorb massive financial strain. Some are Carthage, some are Rome. The question now is not which model is morally superior, but which model is structurally sustainable under pressure. Carthage's system excelled during periods of economic growth, but fractured under extreme stress because its cohesion was transactional. Rome's system could endure catastrophic losses because its cohesion was ideological and civic. Carthage relied on liquidity. Rome relied on solvency. Liquidity wins early, solvency wins long. Carthage's failure was not that it relied on economics. It was that it never integrated its economic engine with a durable political identity. In wealth, it prospered. In crisis, it cracked. Rome, by contrast, fused its economy with citizenship. Its people didn't just contribute to the state, they believed they were the state. That belief created a reservoir of resilience that Rome could draw upon for centuries. When we look at global competition today, the lesson is not subtle. The durability of a power depends less on how much wealth it generates and more on how deeply that wealth is embedded in its social contract. The states that endure are not the richest ones. They are the ones that can convert financial strain into collective resolve. Carthage challenged Rome with pure economics. Rome responded with a reinvention of economics. And what followed reshaped the ancient world. Carthage lost the war, but Rome inherited its system. The commercial empire died. A hybrid financial military empire was born. Its blueprint would echo through European, colonial, and modern geopolitics for centuries. The final irony is this: Carthage, the city erased from the map, ended up shaping the empire that erased it. Because in the struggle between liquidity and solvency, between markets and mobilization, between trade and territory, the victor is rarely the one with the larger treasury, but the one with the deeper unity. History doesn't predict the future, but if you ignore it, you'll walk blind into the same traps empires once did. If this shifted how you see power, economy, or competition, hit subscribe. The past isn't distant, it's a manual. And every episode brings you closer to understanding it.